and government um, entities on tracking their overall programs and creating more efficiencies through technology in the social services space. Through that work, we work with a lot of organizations that have a sudden influx of funding for a myriad of different reasons. I've worked with organizations out of San Antonio that, over the course of the last year have 10 times their budget, which is an incredible situation to be in, as I'm sure many of you feel. But it can also be a huge obstacle really to overcome to try to address all of those capacity needs at once. We've worked with a lot of different organizations across different cause areas to help them use technology in order to address those capacity issues. We also have a team here that does funding research around upcoming grants because we so often find ourselves being the vendor that helps folks meet that capacity need. So through that experience, I've learned a little bit about the funding landscape, what to expect, and excited to share with you all here today. I don't think anybody can be an absolute expert in all of the things that we're going to chat about today, but I'll do my best to be a generalist enough to point you in the right direction and give you some good advice around how you can make sure that you're getting the most out of this truly once in a generation opportunity. And excited to be here today. Thank you guys so much for having me.
All right. Thank you so much, Steph. We're really excited to be able to chat today and learn from you and learn more about social solutions too, and all of the work that y'all are doing to support our sector. First, let's dig into kind of the funding landscape and thinking about the American Rescue Plan Act. So I know it's like a 200-page document, 200 plus probably page document, but from a very high level, what is the American Rescue Plan Act?
Yeah, so the general, TLDR of the very long document with a lot of very complicated parts is that it is meant to help get America back on track from the many multifaceted impacts of the pandemic that we've all seen. So I'm sure many of you have had direct impact from this funding if you've already been vaccinated at many of the vaccination sites that were funded directly through this act and through this program. So tons and tons of money went directly into pop-up vaccine clinics. I was actually vaccinated at a FEMA center, so at 100% of that budget was taken out of the American Rescue Plan Act. Also, a lot of access programs. I know there's quite a few running in Austin through actually United Way of Greater Austin as well. Those access to vaccine programs. So a lot of that funding is coming directly from the American Rescue Plan. It's the things that you would typically think. The second thing that your mind probably goes to is like, schools are wanting to reopen soon. They need a lot of money. That's the next biggest chunk of money that we see in the overall multi-trillion-dollar budget, is a lot of money to help schools safely reopen, knowing that not all kids are going to be vaccinated in the fall. So that's the huge chunk of money. And there is also so many of these other cause areas that are addressing what is now being referred to as the shadow pandemic. So we all know that there were a lot of downstream impacts that happened in society that have nothing to do with whether or not you got COVID-19. The stay-at-home orders saw an incredible increase in situations of domestic violence, particularly with children involved. So there's lots of work to be done in that category. There's learning loss with kids. I think everybody can attest to the fact that it turns out Zoom learning is not the same as being in the classroom. So we're all going to have to address that. Tons of education related funding going down. Homelessness has seen an all-time high during this time. Violence within our communities has seen an incredible increase. There are so many multifaceted social determinants of health that have been impacted by the pandemic. And that is where the rest of this funding is really divided up. So there are a lot of things that might not intuitively seem like they're involved in the pandemic that are going to see a huge increase of funding through the American Rescue Plan Act.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that. And so how does the funding get rolled down from this $1 trillion bill into communities?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's very complicated. So some of it is a little bit more direct, and that is going to be easier to follow. So the schools are a great example of that. The federal government is releasing funding directly to school districts across the country, particularly school districts with high needs. So you'll see that in like New York City's highly concentrated metro areas, DFW, Houston, Austin, AISD will probably see some of that funding rolling down to help them safely reopen. That's a little bit easier to follow. We know the plan was set up at the federal level and then it flowed down directly. Where it gets a little bit more complicated is that certain money is allocated to cause areas, and then certain money is also allocated to municipalities. So like geographic, through the government, different areas. So we'll see an increased direct line of funding that folks can apply to for things like domestic violence services, sexual assault services, things that are going to help with things that we know are directly impacted by this shadow pandemic. And those might come out in block grants, and organizations, particularly large organizations, can apply for those directly from the federal government. What we will see more at the local level is really this trickle down funding. So the federal government is going to be providing a big chunk of money to different cities, particularly. States will also get funding, but cities are really where we're seeing those action plans come together very clearly. The city of Austin has seen, hundreds of millions of dollars that they're going to be allocating, which is what we're going to chat about here today. And that's where it gets more complicated, because then the local government has a lot of role in how there are certain suggestions for how the funding has been earmarked. Homelessness services was one of those things that was rolled down as a suggestion of a way to spend that money. But there is a lot of freedom at the local level to decide exactly what that means and how to allocate. So your city and local government is going to be the best resource for looking at how is the money in my community being spent. And that's what we're going to chat about today.
Wow, that's a lot, which is great. So thinking about that, and I know we're probably going to address this later, and definitely I'm sure some Q&A questions, but what types of sources do you use to track this funding, or are used to track this funding, and are these publicly accessible to the folks on this call?
Yeah, absolutely. We will put some links into, I think, the chat here, and then definitely in the follow-up, you guys will get access to the links of where we go to chase fund, or to, track down how this funding is getting distributed. USAspending.gov is the main one. Like, you can definitely see it's open access information to see how it rolls down. That gets more confusing when it's to a funding agency that's going to then fund additional agencies. The biggest ones of those are going to be the government, right? Like the city of Austin is going to get millions of dollars. And USAspending.gov doesn't say specifically the organizations or the cause areas that's going to roll down to, because that becomes then that city level decision. So the next best place to go for information is city council. There have been meetings, and we'll be talking about what has been decided in those. There's a city council meeting coming up on Friday, and another one. The one on Friday is addressing more generally Austin's overall budget, but it's going to definitely have some insights into how this funding is being rolled down. And then the 27th is when we're going to get even more information about the exact rollout plan within Austin. So to look at the high level of where things are going, we'll provide some resources where you can track that federal level funding. It's not going to tell you, it's going to come down to this specific grant. That type of information is best to access at the city and local level, and stay engaged with city council, particularly over the next few months as these important decisions are being made.
Awesome. And would this be the case for smaller local municipalities as well, like surrounding communities to Austin?
It would. What you see is metros in particular right now are putting forward, pretty comprehensive plans that are very city focused. So like the city of Austin is going to have a very focused plan. Other county level funding is going to be rolling out in the surrounding areas as well. And those you might not see as much, full discussion and discourse and bringing folks in to discuss how we're going to break it down. And the resources available online might be a little bit harder to find. In Austin, you're going to find news articles that break down exactly, how this is being spent, what it means, comments from the community. When you get into areas that are more rural, you're probably not going to have that kind of access to information. But again, it would be whatever the governing body to where it has rolled out. If that's at the county level, then there'll be county meetings, and you can look those up and stay in tune with those if you're interested in an area outside of a major metro. It'll be a little bit harder to find, just to be honest, but it definitely is still happening across the country, and rural focus is a big area that the American Rescue Plan is trying to address, to have equal distribution of this money in metro communities as well as rural.
Okay, wow, it's a lot to learn. So let's dig into Austin then. Can you tell us a bit more about how funding is rolling down specifically in Austin?
Yeah, absolutely. So we got our first insight. I'm very glad that we got enough insights into this to have this conversation here today. We were working on a little bit of a projected timeline of when we thought we would have some details, and thankfully we do. In the June 10th City Council meeting, there was a breakdown of the plan for rolling out the $263.5 million in federal and local dollars that are meant to channel to the impact of these shadow pandemics, particularly. So you'll see in Austin, the largest group by far, almost half of the money is going to homelessness services. And we'll break that down in more detail here in a second. Then we have the public health response, of course, vaccination centers, all of those things that we mentioned previously, direct impacts of the pandemic. Rental assistance is going to be rolling out. That's the next largest category. Then we see workforce, creative sector, which strangely enough is where the nonprofit emergency relief is housed within the overall bill, which was very interesting. But yeah, so you'll see creative sector money for artists, particularly folks that have been hit really hard by not being able to work during the pandemic. Childcare is another area, direct individual assistance to folks that have found themselves in difficult financial times. There's 6.7 million for that. Food security, resiliency hubs, some sustainability and community navigator conversations. And then there's an aspect of it that's a contingency part of the budget.
Wow. So what areas so you've already mentioned what areas will get funding. Is there any more detail that you'd want to share about those specific areas? And I know we're going to dig into some here in a moment, but.
Yeah, I'll leave homelessness for a second because we've got a whole breakdown, particularly focused on that I think will be helpful for folks to understand the kind of unintuitive way that sometimes things are funded through what the named grant is for. I think the areas that the folks on the call would want to focus on, homelessness services will be a big one, workforce, the childcare level of funding, as well as, of course, the nonprofit emergency relief. If any folks have seen a significant decrease in being able to raise funds in the traditional way, that will definitely provide some assistance. The other thing that I always think is important to keep in mind here is access programs as well. So even if your organization directly might not be getting, a line of funding from the Child Care and Family Connects line of funding, if you do work with organization, or if you're an organization that works with families and family sustainability, access can play a huge role in being able to help increase the capacity of the families that you serve. So even if you're not going to see the money yourself, being able to provide resources of how folks can get access to those different lines of funding that might help them obtain childcare, get food security, any of those things, keeping well versed on that is going to be important. So look out for the things if you hear something that pings a cause area that you look into, because you might get direct funding. But even if you're not expecting to get direct funding, if this seems like services and funding that would be impactful to the folks that you serve, it's very good to at least stay in tune so that you can provide access to those resources when those funds do become available.
Yeah, and I wanted to actually ask questions about the access programs. Because there may be folks on the call who are less familiar with that concept. And so I wondered if you could share more about, and I think you already gave some great examples, but if you could give a little more detail about access programs and how they'll play into this.
Yeah, I think it's a really good area to dig into because it can be a little bit unintuitive. So the biggest example I always give, because most of us on the call have lived through and experienced this transition, was when the Affordable Care Act became available. All of the organizations that switched over their model in order to try to help sign folks up for the Affordable Care Act. There were many, many organizations in the nonprofit sector that were particularly designed to help address inequality in health services. That was like their whole mission. And when the Affordable Care Act came out, an important part of transitioning that was getting the folks that now could get insurance over onto insurance. So even though they didn't directly get money from the Affordable Care Act, some did, some access organizations get money to be able to help sign folks up for the program. But for the most part, they don't, but they still want to be able to help connect folks to the direct resources that they can get from a government program. And that's the role of access organizations, being able to provide those resources and that information in an environment where someone's already receiving services and with a relationship they already trust, can be such an impactful part of the overall social sector and being able to give folks more services and more resources.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that and giving that detail. So I know we're going to, all these things we keep preluding to more coming in this conversation, but I do want to ask, what do we know now? Because you mentioned there's been meetings, you're preparing for hoping more information will be available. There's something else coming up later this week and in the future. What do we know now? And when will we know more related to the rescue plan?
Yeah, it's a good question. So what we know is kind of these high level areas of funding. I'll get into homelessness in a second, where we have a little bit more granular detail. Again, it's not very granular. What we don't know is, this is the list of organizations that are targeted for funding. We don't know that. We don't know the exact application program. What we do know is a good hunch on where additional funding is going to be rolling down through, and an opportunity now to be able to advocate for how the folks on the call, who I consider to be the community experts on this, no one knows better what the best way to address need in Austin than the folks that are out there working every day to provide folks with more resources. So the best thing you can do now is stay really engaged in these conversations because you have an important role in advocacy. In terms of knowing more, July 27th is the next meeting where we're supposed to get an additional level of detail. There will be, I'm sure, a very boring PowerPoint that will be released at some point that gives super granular detail that you can dive into. Maybe that'll be on the 27th, might be at the meeting following that, but you'll be able to get some more granular level detail. And then the thing about these funds that also we need to keep in mind is it's not like all $263.5 million is going to be released right at the end of July when we decide how to spend it. There will be a rollout. It'll be gradual. It'll be by cause area or the element of the overall plan that you fall into. In some cases, there'll be applications. In some cases, it'll be contract work, RFPs, all sorts of different things that might come out of that. And some funding will also be released in 2022. It's not quite evenly split. A little bit more of the funding is being released in 2021, but additional funding will be slated for 2022. So it's not a one and done program. There will be kind of a gradual flow out of money that folks can get access to over the next 2 years.
Wow. And so just keeping up with kind of the local communications is one way to keep a pulse on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And making sure that we're representing the voice of the different areas that you guys serve. Everybody has, subject matter expertise on a cause area within Austin, a geographic area, which you've experienced within your own neighborhoods. And these conversations are happening live now. So the time to get your voice heard on what will be most impactful to kids in East Austin, if that's your cause area. This is really the time to make sure that we're representing that. And city council is supposed to be there for us to hear from the community. So hopefully they'll hear you out.
Awesome. Well, let's dig into a more detailed example. So how does this funding impact homelessness services in particular?
Yeah, I don't think I need to express to anyone on the call why homelessness services was an area that Austin wanted to focus on. It really is this direct cross section between what is one of the biggest conversations happening in the social sector in Austin right now, and also what the federal government has earmarked these funds for. This was a particular area that they put focus on and said, in communities that are seeing an increase in homelessness, let's make sure that we are allocating a significant amount of this funding to help getting them resources. I love this example because, I think a lot of times when folks hear homelessness services, they're like, if I don't have a shelter, then that's not for me. That $106.7 million is just not going to impact me at all. But the reality is they've broken this down and a little bit further. Again, this is not very granular, but enough to understand that it's going to include not just traditional housing, which of course we imagined, and not just emergency sheltering like the shelters downtown. Like we had a natural understanding that those would probably be included, but also workforce programs and capacity building. So preventative services or intervention services for folks experiencing homelessness could certainly get a chunk of this. And it's a good advocacy conversation for folks to be a part of, to be talking about, the impact of their work on either preventing or helping provide more robust resources to folks experiencing homelessness. The other thing to know about this, which I think we'll see, again, this is just an example how it breaks down into some things that are not directly. In addition to that, very similarly in the other funding areas, we're going to see that whatever is outlined in this ARPA funding release is not the total picture of the funding. So already, when we look at the total pocket of money that's going to be allocated to homelessness services, there was $222.1 million identified as committed or anticipated already by the city government. So almost twice as much as what's coming from here have already been earmarked. Then of course we have our 106.7 through ARPA. In addition to that, there's been a challenge put out for Travis County and other local players to chip in at least $200 million to fill in the remaining gap of what the city is anticipating we need in order to be able to address the overall challenge that we're facing with homelessness in Austin. So it's a part of the bigger picture that this isn't going to be just the only amount of funding that's going to be rolling down into these areas. It's going to be multifaceted, and we're going to also be seeing like a huge push for additional funds, county, local, and private players as well. You'll see a quote here from Ann Kitchen on her particular thoughts on why this is something that needs to be addressed, and also understanding the need for coordination, capacity building. This is an opportunity to not have to apply for funding in a very lean way, but to truly be able to represent what you need in order to be able to scale your operations if you think you can, make a sizable difference in these cause areas.
Yeah, and on that point, what can we infer from this particular breakout in relation to other cause areas that are outlined?
Yeah, absolutely. So one, it's not always going to be intuitive. Don't, if you work with kids, I would look at all of the funding areas that are related to childcare and families, because sometimes things in family self-sufficiency programs doesn't match the name of the bill. One of the things that, like an example I've always thought was really interesting is I worked with a lot of organizations out of Massachusetts that are youth development orgs. They do like mentoring, after school programs, that kind of stuff. And they get a huge, like the majority of their funding from anti-smoking government grants. And it's like, they don't do really anything directly related to smoking, but the idea is that once it breaks down into, they say, why do kids start smoking? Kids start smoking because they're hanging out by themselves outside of school with other kids, not being supervised. So if we fund more after school programs, that's a great way to decrease the smoking rate in teenagers. So knowing that it's going to be unintuitive like that is very helpful. Just, look at I would really try to look, if funding is meant to be impacting a population you serve, is the best thing to follow, not necessarily what the grant is named or the cause area that it's identifying. Give it a second glance to look into those details. And then again, just on the funding front, don't assume that the chunk of money that you're seeing in one bill or one city council projection is the only amount of money there is. Look into what else is going into there, because maybe you can't get the money through this particular ARPA funding stream from the city government, but you might qualify for some of the 222 that they've already committed or identified, or the 200 million that they're still going to raise.
Mm. And that's, I guess I went to your next question, which is what other funding elements should folks be should folks in this space be aware of?
Yeah, we've got a lot. So all of these are hot links, and we're going to provide these slides to you guys afterwards so you can click into the details. But ARPA is really the tip of an iceberg that could be a much, much larger slate of funding coming into social services. I don't think it's going to, again, be a surprise to anybody on the call that we've been underfunding social services for decades as a country. And many of these funding streams are meant to try to address the incredible social inequality that we're seeing across our country now. So there is probably going to be more. This is really just the first. A few that we already have visibility into and are at least projected to have a good chance at passing. That's the ones that I like to put up here, not the pipe dreams, but the ones that seem like they have some traction. American Jobs Plan is going to cover a ton of additional workforce elements. Again, with the American Jobs Plan, some things that aren't always intuitive. Anybody that works around childcare or, two-generation work where we're working with kids and families, that is another like unintuitive focus. But when funding comes out, there's a huge understanding that a big reason that why more women aren't in the workforce is because they have to be caring for children. So sometimes, even though it's a Jobs Plan Act, there will be money for childcare in those. So kind of look at that family connection as well as workforce build out. Also, who has been historically barred from the ability to participate in the workforce. So there might be funding in there for reentry orgs. There might be funding in there for immigrant populations, just like different folks that have traditionally had less access. I would look into the American Jobs Plan if you think workforce is in some way a part of serving the community that you serve. The American Families Plan directly meant to address the many, many, many challenges that the American families are seeing across our country right now. So there will be a lot in there for childcare, a lot in there for youth development work, family self-sufficiency, home visiting programs. Definitely worth giving a look if you really do any work with families. I would try to have at least a high level understanding. And you don't have to read the bill. For all of these federal funding initiatives, you'll be able to find easy CNN articles, NPR articles that break down in a pretty easy way, like what generally is this funding, and then you can decide whether or not it's worth further inquiry from there. The George Floyd Act is going to have a lot of funding for reform around the way that policing is done. And we've seen that roll out in our communities in things like community-based intervention. Other intervention programs other than having the police be involved. Police retraining will be on there. That work is often done by nonprofits. And then general justice and activism work might be able to get some funding through that one. The Equality Act, any organization that serves traditionally discriminated against folks, particularly the LGBTQ plus community. If you've got a shelter, if you serve at-risk youth, the Equality Act might roll some funding out directly to you. The Violence Against Women Act is looking like it's going to be reinstated or renewed for another series of funding, and it's going to it always changes a little bit whenever we do that. So you might be in a cause area if you serve women, if you serve children, if you serve anybody who is at risk of being in some way impacted by violence in their life, then VAWA is a good one to follow for you. And then immigration reform, this is the most general. We really have no idea like directly what it looks like in terms of the rollout of funding, but we do know if there's any large scale immigration reform, workforce programs, organizations serving immigrants, any refugee resettlement programs, et cetera, are going to see some sort of increase in capacity. So this is just the tip of the iceberg of what might be coming. But just know that ARPA is just the beginning. There's likely to be at least one or a few of these different cause areas that will roll down very similarly from the federal government into direct funding streams for larger organizations, and then down to the city level for the smaller organizations.
Wow. And with all of this on the horizon, potentially on the horizon, and then also thinking about the rescue plan now, what role can we play in advocating for how funds would be allocated in these upcoming bills?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it can't be overstated enough that like being engaged in these conversations is a huge part of the advocacy. If your organization considers themselves to be advocates in a certain area, these are the conversations that we want to be involved in. Getting your voice heard at the national level can be difficult. I would say rolling up to whoever the national association is over the type of work you do is a really great way to have an impact, because they are certainly involved in these conversations. So for example, the National Network to End Domestic Violence connects all of the various state coalitions that then roll down to all of the local work. And if you feel passionately about, something in VAWA, they're a great organization to reach out to. They're meant to represent the voice of the folks on the ground. So I would look at that if you want to like have an impact on how this happens in a national level. Who can you roll up to so we can have more collective voice, because that's always going to make us stronger. And then at the local level, again, city council is here to serve us. You guys are the community. You are the folks addressing this need, working with the people of Austin. So know your city council members, show up and participate in conversations if you can. I know that there's always so much work to be done and so little time to do it. But this is a really important part of the overall work being done. So that would be my recommendation for now.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And we've got a few links we're going to drop in chat real quick, but we've already touched on this a little bit, but do you have anything more you'd want to share on how organizations can keep informed on where funding stands, and then maybe even other ways to get engaged with their government locally?
Yeah, absolutely. City council in Austin is definitely going to be your best way. At the county level, I would look up how they're meeting and when they're meeting. You'll probably be one of few people engaged in those meetings. So your voice can be very well heard. I think a rural area is a really great area to get engaged, and they're, encourage that kind of participation. In Austin, there's lots of folks already in the room. So, getting your voice heard might be a little bit more challenging, but there's certainly lots of opportunities to connect. So definitely that's how I would stay engaged. And then staying informed. You can follow these generally. I think that's a really good thing to do. Like earmark the ones that you think might be impactful to your organization. And then I'm a big fan of Google alerts. So when you I get distracted and the information is random, like it comes out at random times. Sometimes you have nothing's happening for months and months, and then they have 4 meetings like all in a week. So Google alerts can help you know when things are picking back up, entering the keywords that are included in the conversations around the plan. So American Jobs Plan Austin, set a Google alert for yourself if you have a workforce organization. And then as news develops, you can follow it a little bit more closely. That's kind of the 2 main ways I would do. I know everybody doesn't have time to do 8 hours of research every week on what funding streams might be rolling to their organization. So that's a much quicker, more efficient, do it once and get on with your life sort of keep track of things.
Yeah, that's so practical. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to go change some of my settings. All right, so I think now we want to so we've got this funding or interest in this funding. What are, let's talk about capacity drivers a bit. Who is this type of funding for? I know you've already shared some of that information, but if you could share a bit more.
Yeah, so I know that there's often a perception that this type of federal funding and these, initiatives are really only for very large, very well-connected, long-standing organizations. I would challenge that. I don't necessarily think that's true, but I also don't think that every grant should be for everyone. There's such a thing as bad money. And if you take a huge chunk of funding that is going to drastically increase the overall budget of your organization, and it's not really in the core competencies of what you do or what your organization is meant to be focused on, it can go from a great opportunity to mission creep really fast. So I think these grants are for, and this level of funding is for any organization that feels that what the target is of the funding aligns directly with the impact they're trying to have in the community, and they can sustainably meet the needs of that funding stream, the capacity that they're asking for, without overall harming their ability to deliver on mission. There are some things that you can do out of the gate, which we'll talk about here in a second, that can help you quickly address capacity. You might be more able to take on a large level of federal funding than you think if you utilize some different things that can increase the capacity of a small organization. But that would be what I would say. Don't take things that stray you off the path that you're very committed to being on, and do make sure that you can sustainably address the capacity needed before you take on a large level of funding.
Then let's talk about capacity drivers. Like, what are some capacity drivers that organizations should be or could be thinking about?
Yeah, so we as a technology company, we work in operational software for organizations. So I'm going to be pretty tech focused on this. I'll address some other potential capacity drivers here in a second. But the top 5 ones that when we work with an organization to address like a large level RFP, and they're responding basically saying how they would scale up their program utilizing our technology. These are the 5 areas we like to outline in those responses to big federal funding streams. The first thing is if you don't have online intake can be a massive time saver. I think, just because we've done things a certain way for a long time, sometimes we can kind of miss the forest through the trees, and not realize that like we could save 50% of our staff's time if we just took that online. An organization we worked with out of Kansas City calculated it actually after they moved to online intake, and they saved 85 days of staff time just in their one summer intake program, which is where they serve a majority of the kids that they serve. But they were spending 85 days of staff time that was literally just collecting documents, organizing things to know who needs to be brought into the program. That's very easy to bring online. Easy to get folks. If you need documents, they can upload documents from their phone. It just overall is going to increase your ability to bring on new clients. And it's also better for serving clients where they're at, right? Because if I am a working mom with 3 kids, I might need to enroll in a program at 2:30 in the morning when I get off my last shift. So having online intake is also an accessibility driver, which is great. Digital client communication is awesome. I totally understand the human impact of the work that we do. And I'm by no means suggesting that we would, blast messages to survivors of assault and be like, here are your resources. I understand that technology is not the solution for everybody. But I don't think that after school programs need to call every single parent and say that it's raining and so soccer is canceled. There are communications that we can do in a mass format and save staff time. So utilize it where it makes sense, keeping, of course, the impact of your services in mind when you do that. Having any sort of system of record that is very configurable is going to make it much easier to take on additional funding streams, because one of the biggest reasons we hear from folks they don't take on additional funding is because they're worried about their reporting requirements. That is oftentimes because they have to reformat paper forms. They have an access database they don't know how to fix. They are working on a type of software that they're going to need to pay somebody to be able to reconfigure the forms to collect the new information they need. So just make sure you have something that allows you to do something as simple as start collecting veteran status if it becomes necessary for a funding stream. Workflows and alerts. Set up the workflow and the stream that you want your staff to be working on at the beginning when things are not crazy, and then allow it to work for you as you do. Tell me when this report has, or this client has not been contacted in 7 days. Tell me when, I'm 90 days out from the original case plan so I can follow up. All of those sort of internally built things that help you work very quickly and efficiently. And then native reporting. If you have to export everything that you do from 9 different systems in order to figure out how things are going, you are not going to be able to capacity manage well. You want dashboards, you want real-time reporting, you want to understand how things are going while they're going. Those are the 5 biggest ones that we address. Some other things I've heard outside of the technology we serve are, what does your hardware look like? How old are the computers everybody's working on? That can be a big capacity driver. Do you actually have the space that you need, physical space, in order to be able to provide the services? Do you have the head count? These are all the types of things that you can apply for in those grants. Have an honest conversation. If they're asking you to serve 10 times as many people, talk about what you would actually need to be able to serve 10 times as many people. They would prefer your honesty. And I promise you, the people that are winning those RFPs are writing in a good amount for capacity building.
Wow, that is all super helpful. I can just think about all the different Excel sheets that folks are navigating.
Yes, exactly. Excel is a beautiful thing. It probably won't 10 times your operations overnight. It definitely has its use case in its place. But it can be the death of 25 new reporting requirements very quickly.
Yes. All right. So what role do partnerships and collaborations play in this particular opportunity? And thinking about capacity and thinking about the funding, what can we think about on that in collaboration?
I love that question. I think there's an old adage that I love very much that says, if you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that is a perfect example of that. If you are a small organization that serves a sliver of a workforce solution, the best thing you can do is get together with other organizations, many of which I'm sure you're already referring folks to, right? Like, who are you sending places to do things for the folks in your community that you don't do? Those are great people to have collective conversations with. At the leadership level, if you can, get executive directors together, talk about this rollout of additional funding and how you guys might be able to apply as a group. That is a really common thing that we're seeing a lot more now in this space, is instead of, only very large multi-service providers applying, you'll see a collaborative of smaller organizations that address specific need. That is a really effective way to obtain a bunch more funding upfront. The other great thing is small organizations, in addition to the capacity driver challenges, are going to have a fewer headcount. And so people bring different skills to the table. So if you bring on more small organizations, people have other skill sets. Maybe an organization you're working with has figured out online intake, or they have a great digital client communication path. They have, the best hardware. They're going to be able to have the facility. Maybe you don't have a facility, but they do. Look for people that have things that you don't have that you could work with collaboratively, because that's going to get you a much better chance of actually obtaining the funding, and then being able to really sustain it over time and work collaboratively and focus on your areas of strength.
Wow. And I'm going to ask two more questions before we get to the Q&A, because we're at 9:45 now. But since we're talking about collaboration work, and then I want to dive into equity a little bit, but I first want to just ask, how would someone get plugged into the collaborative work in their cause area if they aren't already, especially thinking about capacity drivers and funding?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think this, Mission Capital is a great connector for a lot of that. So if there are folks that are wondering, hey, I want to get connected to other people in my cause area, but I don't know where to start, I would definitely respond in the chat, respond in the survey, let us know who you are and who you're trying to get connected to, because these kind of community connectors play a key role in that. And then again, looking up at that next level of who, there generally is somebody, if you go broad enough within your cause area, that is trying to connect organizations doing that work. So great example in Austin, if you have a youth development program, even if it's really small, youth development after school program, you serve 50 kids. E3 is the connecting organization, E3 Alliance, the connecting entity over all folks focused on education and youth development work within Austin. So look to see if there is a governing body over the type of work that you do focus on. And even if you're not a part of their funding stream, I think that's a thing that I don't know if I knew until I got into like the back end of this work. But just because you're not getting money through the Alliance doesn't mean that you can't rely on their best practices, resources, or opportunities for networking. If they think that you're too small to receive one of their grants, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be a part of the conversation. So that's where I would get plugged in, at that like Alliance collaborative level. If you look and you can't find anything, reaching out to Mission Capital is a good backup as well. They're pretty well connected.
Thanks for the plug. Wasn't intended. But yeah, I do want to let everyone know, if you do have a cause area that you do want to get connected on, we will happily follow up with, as we said, we're going to share this recording and slides and resources that everyone else shares. But if you have resources too about collaborative work, or you are a hub, please feel free to share that in the chat, and we'll be able to follow up with folks as well. But my last question before we head into Q&A is, how do these high-level strategic decisions impact equity and inclusion?
It's a really important area to think about when we talk about how to advocate, getting at those city council meetings, speaking for your local community. It really is, particularly because of the issue of equity and access. I heard an expression once that said, the difference between women and men applying to jobs is that women won't apply to a job unless they meet 100% of their requirements, and men will apply to jobs when they meet like 40% of their requirements. And so a lot of times they end up in higher positions more quickly just because of that discrepancy. And I think we see it really similarly in the social good space. Smaller organizations that don't have as large of capacity, haven't been around for 150 years, aren't the oldest, most funded organization in their their cause area don't apply for these funding streams. They don't participate in these city council conversations. A lot of that has to do with capacity. I don't mean to be glib to that. I totally understand that when you only have so many hours a day and you have people to serve, you focus on serving the people, but it really can create that equity and access issue because those conversations are shaping who gets more resources, and who gets more resources shapes what you're going to be able to do for those clients. So as much as we want to be able to bootstrap it and put the team on our back and do what we can with as little as we have to meet our community's needs, being an advocate in these conversations can play a role in actually having what you need to be able to address that overall capacity. So it's definitely something I think is worth, prioritizing, and remind yourself when you're going, you're not wasting an hour at a very frustrating city council meeting. You are advocating, you're doing an important equity and access initiative. It is a part of a larger conversation. Just keep repeating that to yourself as you're getting frustrated, because I know you would rather be out serving the people of your community. And I completely empathize with that, but this is also a really important part.
And I think that's probably another important part about the collaboration piece, is an opportunity to build strengths together. All right, and with that, I want to just remind folks in the chat that if you have access to collaboration opportunities, or you know of some, or you know of a hub, or you yourself can connect folks, or if you want to connection to a particular cause, issue, or topic, please drop that in the chat. You can also send us an email if you would rather not drop it into the chat, at events@missioncapital.org, and we'll also be sharing some stuff at the end as well. And again, we're going to share this out. Now I want to hold space for, in the last 10 minutes, for any kind of questions. We've already received quite a few in the chat, which will surface here in a moment. But if folks have other questions that have been kind of percolating as you've listened, if you want to share those in chat, you can send them either directly to me and Mary, or you can drop them for everyone, or the events at email. So we'll be definitely surfacing those. But I'm going to give everyone just a moment. I'm going to pause for a moment for folks to drop in their questions if they have them. Otherwise, we've got quite a few we can start with.
Yeah, absolutely. And while folks are getting their questions into the chat, just wanted to do a little plug for Social Solutions and who we are as an organization. We have a lot of additional resources. If you are looking at, all right, I think I'm going to receive a big chunk of funding, or I really want to drive my capacity, and I think technology is a big part of meeting that gap. Some of the things that I mentioned today seem interesting to you, or something that you guys might need to build capacity around. Even if you're not ready to have a conversation about software, we have a lot of resources. We will be sending this out, this framework for evaluating your technology. It's a self-guided resource, so you don't have to talk to anybody. You can just do it for yourself. And it is, I got to tell you, very clarifying for most organizations, even if they don't work with our technology as a solution for these problems, just to have everything out on paper around what you're using now, whether or not it's working for you, and some ideas about what might be able to improve the efficiency of your programs is going to be really helpful. So this will be in the follow-up information. This is what we do as a company. If you have additional questions, my contact information will also be provided. Happy to answer those questions as well.
Thanks. That's perfect to set us up for the questions. All right. So we have quite a few that have come through. We have a few that are very specific and a few that are broad. So I'm going to start with some that are kind of broad, and some of them are also touched on things that we've already heard about a little bit. So I'm just going to see if you can share a little more detail. So someone shared that it's been easier to figure out the city of Austin plans for spending these funds, but understanding Travis County or other areas has been a little more difficult. Do you have any specific updates for other areas outside of Austin, maybe Travis County or other communities?
Yeah, I did try to look into county level funding. I'm finding basically what you guys are finding as well, that there's not a lot of transparency around it yet. In general, with county funding, it's going to roll into an actual like public sector entity. So I would try to look for the government entity in your local community that's most associated with your work. So if you're in, outside of Travis County, if you're in another area looking and you serve families, for example, try to look at that county's Department for Family Services. Inquire, again, they are government employees. They're meant to be able to help the community access those resources. So reach out to folks within the public sector and just ask, like, hey, where can I find more transparent information about how this is rolling out? Education is probably going to go through the school district, the ISD in the area. So that's an area to follow if you do education services, youth development work. And And then Department of Health and Human Services in most counties is going to do a lot of the other stuff. So I think I saw someone say they provide aging services. There might be in a smaller county, there might be a Department of Aging Services, but in general, if you don't find a specific area of cause lined out, it'll be the Department of Health and Human Services overall. And then trying to find the person with the title most closely aligned, reaching out in that way, or following those county websites is going to be your best bet. They are less transparent, and there's not going to be as much news press about it, which is going to make it a little bit harder to follow. But you should at least be able to, from that federal level, see that it rolled down to the county, and then you can inquire with the right department and say, hey, I saw that we're getting an influx of $50 million from the federal government. I'm interested in hearing about how it's rolling out into the community. Who should I speak to about that? Would probably be the next step I would take if you can't find it online.
Yeah, that's really helpful, because we did have someone ask if there's anything for senior adults, and that may be what you're alluding to with the aging services.
There definitely will be.
Look.
Yeah, that I wanted to outline that as well. There definitely, we saw in ARPA, there was an outline for aging services. Yeah, particularly around homelessness services for aging adults. That's definitely an area that's getting funding, as well as overall just capacity and need. And then more funding for nonprofit like care facilities. So there's definitely additional funding happening in aging services. I think Austin has more details on that and that overall plan. So I would look out, if you are in Austin, I would look out for that rollout plan on the 27th, and literally just like Control F for aging services. And you'll probably be able to find it pretty quickly, how much is rolling out and what they're earmarking it for.
Cool. And thinking about that a little bit, do you have any idea why the federal government may have given most of the fundings to cities versus states for distribution?
It is interesting. It's not to get too political, but it is a little bit of a difference between parties. Democratic funding initiatives like roll down more at that municipal level, at that city and local level. Also, I think in this particular case with the I don't think that we'll see this as much with the other funding streams coming up, like the American Jobs Plan and stuff. I think that will go through traditional state agencies. The two reasons I think that it happened the most with ARPA is the speed and urgency of addressing. So trying to get the money to the community as quickly as possible. The higher up you go, the longer it takes to roll all the way down to the people. So like, let's get these people the money now, I think was one part of it. And then two, when it came to, again, the largest part of this plan, which was vaccine distribution, a lot of early studies showed that the more local the rollout is and the more specialized it is to the community, the higher the rate of vaccination is going to be. And so I think that was one area they wanted to make sure that that money was able to go directly to the cities. And I think they just followed suit with saying, they're the ones that are going to understand best what the impact has been in domestic violence and homelessness, et cetera. So those are kind of the main overall reasons. I don't anticipate we'll see that as much with the upcoming funding streams, but if this is really successful and they find that the impact to the community is what they're seeing, it might have a downstream impact on how other funds are rolled out later.
Wow. Okay. Super helpful. Thank you. Do you know if, kind of in the same vein, do you know if state agencies are hosting conversations around some of these funds?
They are. Yeah, I would definitely look into your state agency, and even, proactively reach out, right? Like if you can say like, hey, we're curious about how we can make the most of American Rescue Plan dollars in our community, how we can work collaboratively to advocate on behalf. So reach out to the representatives that are meant to speak with the local community at those state agencies if you can. Again, another role that is played there, if you can't get into the state agency, there's a lot of bureaucracy, they're busy, all that kind of stuff. The associations oftentimes have a direct role with them. So reaching out to the Association of Aging Services in Texas, or an organization that's meant to be a larger governing body, they might be able to tell you who the right people are, or they might be providing resources, having webinars like this one more specific to your cause area.
Wow. Okay. Those are all great tips. All right. Last question before we close. How important is it to submit comments on the interim final Treasury rule for use of ARPA funds? A specific question.
Yeah, I like that question. I think it's always valuable, any and everywhere. That's the thing about the inquiry for feedback from our government entities. There are a million reasons why it might not be conducive, or we might feel like we're throwing information into a black hole, but the advocacy work done by making time to use every avenue they give you for feedback is really helpful, because that's what folks, rely on and say, well, we gave an opportunity for feedback, whether or not they listen to it. To have your name in that in that bucket is really important. So I think any and every time that you can provide comment is great. Your perspectives are so valuable. I think community members should be providing feedback as much as possible, and that represents one individual voice, but each of you have a higher impact role, because you can talk about the larger group of folks that you serve and the impact that you've seen, and you're doing the work. Like, you really are out there doing the work. So I think your input is very valuable. I would highly suggest getting involved in whatever way you feel comfortable as an organization. And I think sometimes the other thing is there can be trepidation of like, we don't want to, like, we're not a political organization. Speaking to your subject matter expertise on the impact of different policies on the community you serve is not political advocacy. Supporting an individual candidate, helping somebody run for mayor, those things might fall under political advocacy. And maybe you're not allowed to do that based on your funding streams, but you can always speak to your expertise, and you can always be a voice for your local community, speaking the truth of how different policies would impact them. So don't be too nervous that you're going to be overly politicized as an organization just by speaking about your lived experience of working with these folks, and many times of being from these communities.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you, Steph, just generally for sharing all of this information, and for answering all these questions, and then also just keeping on top of this so that we can learn from you and from Social Solutions. So I just want to say thank you very much to you for sharing with us. And of course, is there anything else you'd want to share before we have our final wrap up?
No, I really appreciate everybody's time on the call. I see that we have, 82 folks with us here total. I know how valuable everyone's time is, and just appreciate all the work that you guys are doing to make the community a better place. Funding streams are cool. Initiatives are awesome. The reality is our communities only get better by the work you guys do every single day. So thank you all for what you're doing.
Thank you. And yes, thank you everyone on the call for being here. We're dropping an evaluation into the chat. And if you could just take a few moments, pull up in another window if you can. If you don't have time to take it right now, maybe later today. We really value your feedback so that we can continue to deliver and improve and design new programming. So we're really excited about getting to hear whatever you want to share with us. And finally, just again, thank you so much, Steph, and Jennifer too at Social Solutions for your partnership and providing all of us with this vital, very important information about funding. If you have any questions at all about today's event or presentation, we will be following up again with recording and information. And you can also email us at events@missioncapital.org. All right, have a wonderful day. Thank you all.
Bye guys, thank you.